Ahoy there! Welcome to another changelog video for Superfactory Manager. The last video was a couple months ago, so I figured it was time to do another. The last version I reviewed was 4.20.0, and since then there's been about 3 releases, so I figured I'd go through them in order. So we have 4.21, 4.22, and 4.23 that we're going to look at. In version 4.21, I introduced a new Intellisense feature, which is currently disabled by default, but it's kind of interesting as the groundwork for something that can be a bit better. So when you're in the program edit screen, in the bottom left, the button that used to toggle line numbers now opens a configuration screen where you can still turn the line numbers on and off. And there's also the Intellisense options. So basic will turn on the keywords, and then advanced will also show items. So to demonstrate that, if I go into this program and I say input stone, then it will search all the items in the game and find stone. But if I go to just basic, then it won't search the items because I expect there to be a lot of items in mod packs. So for a base program, like when you start with nothing, you can accept the Intellisense suggestion using the / key, because right now tab will indent and de-indent the program. So the program can be written a bit more quickly using the Intellisense. So if I say name, move 1 stack, every 20 ticks do input from A, output to B. And this will actually pull the labels from the disk for the Intellisense. So if I, instead of A and B, I say left and right, then that will be the program that will move from left to right. So any items in here are moved to the right-hand side. And this is currently a work in progress. It's a little awkward to have to hit escape if you want to hit the down arrow, otherwise the Intellisense suggestion will eat the keyboard input. So that's work in progress right now, but it's interesting. And the search I want to improve, because right now it's using a logic that I'm not quite satisfied with. So if I say stone in the advanced mode, then presumably you'd want to see Minecraft stone first. So if I say Minecraft stone, then we get the suggestion. But if I don't type the whole thing, then ST technically matches chest, but I'd rather see stone first, so I'm not happy with the metrics right now. And then I added missing focus highlight from tab navigation in the manager screen. So when you're in the screen and you hit tab, it focuses the buttons in order, as it should, whereas previously some of these buttons would not receive the tab index correctly. And then the syntax highlighting for the second keyword, so if I say every second do, then it is now yellow instead of white. And I fixed the escape quotes and strings. So if I say name bruh, then this disk is now named bruh. But if I say name bruh with a escaped double quote, then now that double quote is present without the /, whereas previously the / would have been included in the display. And I've added a reminder when Superfactory Manager crashes the game that there's a config to turn off the managers. So if we look inside the server config, then there is a disable program execution value that if you set to true, none of the managers will run their code. And that's in case something terrible is going on and you want to manually break one of the managers, but if the managers start executing when the world loads, then you'd have a problem. So this can help with those scenarios. So in a block entity, there is a fill crash report category helper function that I've overridden to include a reminder text. So if I manually crash the game by going to the tick function, oh no. And then I apply this change. Then now the game will crash. So if I get rid of that code before I forget to do so, and look at the logs, so here's our crash report. We've received a runtime exception of oh no inside the mods code. And then the detailed walkthrough, it gives the issue tracker URL, and below that there is the reminder that I've included. So you can set the disable program execution true, and then it gives the path to the config value. And the details are some additional diagnostic info from Superfactory Manager, including the program and the labels. Additionally, I've added a hotkey reminder to the Ctrl+i overlay. So when you're in an inventory, any inventory, with Facade Manager, you can hit Ctrl+i to toggle a inspector view where it gives you the predicted index of each of the slots in the inventories. And now this overlay gives you a reminder on what the hotkey is because people have turned this on accidentally and not known how to turn it off. So that should hopefully reduce those scenarios. And finally, I've fixed a disconnect issue in clearing the facades from the cables. So if you have some inventory cables that you have disguised, so by putting the network tool in the offhand, you can apply a texture to the cables, but these still work as inventory cables. And there was a problem where when you cleared the texture, it would disconnect you if you're playing on a multiplayer server, and that is now fixed. So that was for version 4.21.0, and then in 4.22.0, thank you to Spruce Mist for the GitHub sponsorship, and additionally, thank you to God Tier User for also a GitHub sponsorship, in addition to all the Ko-fi sponsors that I have, including Microwave, Lin, Rick Deckard, Satharov, The Vooz, Cuther, Gyro Twister, and Captain Pirate. And the fixes include clearing the network managers when the level unloads and the water tank block entities. So when the cables are being placed in the world, they form a network that I'm able to use to reduce duplicated effort. So when the program executes, it doesn't need to rediscover the cables every single time the program runs. And when you load into the world, this is generated for the first time. And when you leave the world, it is now being cleared properly, whereas before it would stay in memory just without doing anything. And the water tanks also do similar logic where they form a network of the connected blocks. So you'll notice that when I load into the world, the network doesn't actually exist. So the network tool in my offhand is displaying the networks that it's observing. So because the manager ticks every 20 ticks or whatever the program is inside it doing, it has discovered the network that includes the manager block there, but these cables aren't being used yet until they are. So if I place another cable, then that forms a network as part of the block placement logic. And now when the world clears, this is properly being forgotten. And the same thing happens with the water tank. Because these have a adjacency bonus. So if you have multiple that are active at the same time, then they give more water. So for example, the internal buffer is 2,000 millibuckets, and then when I activate the third one, it should be increased. So each of them now has 4,000 millibuckets. So thank you, Lingardium, for the bug report on that. And there was the second keyword. So if you do every second do, then this would previously be treated as ticks. So it would not be multiplying by 20. So if I say every 5 seconds, that would do every 5 ticks before the fix. So I think it was just for the singular one. So if you said every 5 second do, then that would be 5 ticks, but now that's fixed. And I've split the game tests into multiple files. So the way the testing works in Facade Manager is I have a bunch of tests. So if I do test run, I get the list of all of the tests that I've added, and I can run all. So these are all the different test scenarios that I've coded in the mod to try and identify when behavior is broken. And these are now in a bit more of a manageable state because the test files are one test per file now. So if I say move one stack, then now I have the template, which is the size of the area, and then the run function, which will set up the test and perform the checks. And some of these have a bit more complicated logic, but this makes it easier to copy an existing test without having the changes between all the versions be weird. So thankfully, all the tests are currently passing. And the game test registration logic with the dynamic structure generator. So that is in the game tests. Usually this has to be the name of a structure. So if I say test create, whatever the argument is, test name, bruh. Then by default, this expects you to use the structure block to save the structure, and this should be the name of a structure. But because I create the tests programmatically instead of creating them in the world, it will, for my needs, I just want to create an empty platform where I can put the test on top of. So if I say test run move one stack, then this test is created by setting up the blocks using this helper that I've created where it will add chests in the manager by manually setting the block in the world instead of it being part of the structure. But for that to work, I want to be able to create a dynamic platform of any size. So that's using a mixin. So this will override the feature that tries to get the structure block by the ID. And if the namespace of that structure block identifier is the Superfactory Manager mod, then we generate a structure template dynamically given the size that we parse from that template. So we parse the value. So we say a platform that's 3 by 2 by 1, and then that gets created in this structure config. And that saves me from having to deal with a bunch of NBT files where it was like 3 by 2 by 1 .mbt, 3 by 4 by 1 .mbt or whatever. And fix peekExtractPotential to return the stack and the slot instead of the extract max for more accurate count of oversized inventories. So if we have a barrel from sophisticated storage, and if this thing is upgraded, then the max stack size in this is greater than 64. So when you call extract stack, it will tell you that when you look at the inventory, there's 320 inside the first slot, but when you actually try and extract from it, it'll only give you 64. So now when Superfactory Manager is counting the items in the inventory, it's counting what the stack inside is reported as rather than what the potential extraction is, because the potential extraction is less than, is going to be clamped to whatever the max stack size is, whereas this can be greater than the default max stack size. And the facades now inherit the light level of the block they are appearing as. So if we have a cable and we facade it as glowstone, then that block now emits light. I think the game test bugged the light level a little bit. So I wonder if placing a block will fix that. So thank you to Vooz for the suggestion. And I fixed some behavior where retain was being improper. So if we look at the example I provided in the README, or in the changelog, so if we say input retain 300 from dank storage bottom side, this would miscalculate the items. So if you have an item or a inventory that can hold more than 64 in a stack, it would be incorrect with the retain logic, which now it works. So I think I have a test for that. So we have the dank storage dock with 256 in the slots, and we're inputting with some retain on that. And it will now stop moving once there's 512 remaining. So it puts more into the dank to start with. So we can actually find that test. So dank input retain regression, is that the one we just ran? Yeah. So this will place the dank block dock in the world programmatically and then fills the items in it. And it will run the program and assert that the result is what we want. And then I fixed the label gun GUI text edit box, limiting the labels to 32 characters. So by default in the label gun, this is either search or you can edit a custom label. And this was behaving weird because it was imposing a 32 character limit when that is not the actual limit. And the actual limit has been raised from 80 to 256. And to give you an example on how long that is, then the length of that looks like this. So it's quite significant. You're probably not going to need that much, but there's not really a reason that, yeah, I just figured why not. And the VSCode extension has been improved, so thank you TTOP for the help on that. And then fixing a divide by zero exception in the program edit screen. So when you're in the manager, this edit screen, if you get to having it be long enough, there is the scroll bar, and this is from vanilla that I'm reusing some of these components. So this text area technically is performing line wrapping behavior, and in the program edit screen, I've overridden the display to not do line wrapping, but the scroll bar was calculating things using the line wrapped height, and there was some weird math going on where it would cause a divide by zero. So I've attempted to fix that, and then I'm pretty sure the fix didn't work, so in a future version I fixed it again. And then now it's wrapped in a try catch, so even if I didn't fix it, it should avoid crashing the game. So that was 4.22.0, and then now the latest release is 4.23.0. So the first item added more auto-lowercase rules for the regex like resource identifiers to avoid when the program is not working because people wrote a regular expression that they didn't realize. So if we look at this program and I say input stone from left, and then if I have stone, it will input only the stone from the left side. But if I input capital S stone, then it should still work. Even though when you quote the identifiers, this becomes a regular expression. Because when you do star arrow, that actually becomes dot star arrow, because that's what the regular expression is. So when it's quoted, the behavior is different. So here it moved just the arrow and not the potion. And this conversion, when put in quotes now, it will detect, if I say stone, that this doesn't use any of the special characters that actually make it a regular expression, so it will automatically lowercase this. Whereas if you do a symbol that is not a valid resource identifier character, then it will now actually become a regular expression. So now that should no longer match stone because it's expecting capital S. So I've added hotkeys for the label gun behavior, whereas some people don't have the, like if they're on a trackpad, it's a little harder to do the shift scroll behavior. So if I have a bunch of labels that I want to apply to some chests or some machines, so if I want to label all of these, I can hit Control and right click to label all of them. And that is now a hotkey. So under Super Factory Manager, there's the clear modifier, the contiguous modifier, and there's also next label and previous label hotkeys. And there's a pick block and a pull. So the behavior has been quite, it's still behaving the same. The only new one is the next and previous label hotkeys, but it's now all configurable. And you can, so if I have a few things labeled like that, you can use Alt right click by default to pull a label. So if I say, I want to pick one of these, then it will pick one of the label, it'll rotate through the labels that are already present on the block. So if I say, label that over there. When I alt right click this one, I get these two. And when I alt right click that one, I get those two. But if I have some chests, when I contiguously pick block from these, it'll rotate through all the blocks that are present on those blocks. So for these mechanism machines, they have left, bruh, and fdas. And when I alt right click the chest, I get A, B, and just those two. And the clearing behavior, so when you shift right click, it will clear the label. And then when you Control Shift right click, it will now clear from the contiguous blocks. And if I Control Alt Shift right click, it'll clear just the selected label from the contiguous blocks. So if I select A and then do that, it'll remove A from those ones. And then, yeah, we have the switch label hotkey now. And then there was a fix for contiguous label assignment not working when the world is initially loaded. So as I showed before, when you save and load the world, the cable network that these forms is not present until the network is actually used or modified. And that would behave weirdly. So when you come into the world and you try to label something contiguously, that would use the cable network, but when you first load in and that's not present, this would fail. So now it's properly, even if you just load into the world, this will work properly. So we see with the network tool that this is not actually been cached into a network, but I can still contiguously label and unlabel these blocks. And I've added a notification in chat when blocks are skipped. So because this only applies the contiguous labeling to blocks that are adjacent to the cable, so that you can't right-click a dirt on a super flat world and crash your game, it will only label the blocks that are touching cables. So if I do that, it's skipping some of these blocks that are touching these ones but are not touching the cables, and now you get feedback in the chat when that is happening. So if I were to break that cable and try and label these, before I'd be like, why is this one not being included? But it's because the cable's missing, and now it says in chat. And I've silenced some mixin warnings. So when the game launches, the mixin that I use to declare the size of these structures is technically only needed when I'm in the dev environment for the game tests, but trying to include a mixin that's only present in the dev environment was not behaving correctly. And the mixin was complaining that the optional value was missing in production, and now I've moved it so that this is actually just present, and that should fix the warning. So it means the jar file is very slightly larger for code that's never going to be used, but it means you don't get as much log spam, which is worth it. I've cleaned up the known issues. So in here, this file gets included as one of the examples. So JEI support is missing from some versions. I think that's like 1.20.4 maybe. And sometimes the managers can stop for no reason, though I haven't heard reports of that in a long time. But when it does happen, one of the testing things that you can do is rebuild the cable network, and that will bust this cache that is used. So in case something got desynced, it'll potentially fix it. And if you have multiple managers, then of course this network is different than that network. So it's helpful to have the bust cable network cache command, and that will do the same thing. And the mouse drag desyncs when you move position in scripts with long lines. So if I have a long script, when I put my mouse here, it kind of works. And then if I look at the change log, so my mouse is on this line, but the selection is above there. And if I scroll down, I think it gets even more desynced. So after a certain point, it's not even on the screen anymore. So that needs some attention. And outputting to composters in 1.20.3 plus without specifying a side will void the items. And that is because of the way the capability is implemented. And I just haven't had the time to fix it. So I've cleaned up that file, which included some previous stuff that has now been fixed. And I've added Chinese and Brazilian Portuguese localization. So thank you, Ki Chen-sen and Jump and Isa de la Cruz for those contributions. And I've included a fix for the printing press causing a ghosting behavior. So Lenny Servant has correctly identified logic where that was when we assemble the printing press recipe. This has a check to see if the recipe matches, and then the assembling step, when we get the item from the form that's included. So if I run the printing press to clone an enchantment, this has the form item, which includes a copy of the book. When the book was being copied, the item that is outputted from that copying process was actually taking the item out of the form because it was using the reference when this helper function. So I've split this into two different functions where you can get the borrowed reference or get a copied reference. And this one will always return a copy. But the way it works is after 1.20 something, I don't know, one of the versions changes from NBT data to component data. And in the NBT versions, this is always deserializing a new item stack from the NBT. So this would always return a copied value. So when in the later versions, I was using the same function, it was stealing the reference instead of receiving a copied value. So now this is explicitly two different functions. And in the later versions, this one always returns a new one. So we can see that in the code. So if I open the recent, So now when we call printing press recipe and we call get copied reference from form, this is now getting the borrowed reference and calling copy on it explicitly, because this is getting the data component for the form reference from the stack, and this will share the reference when this is called on the same stack multiple times. So when you assemble the recipe, it's now giving you a owned value that it's allowed to return and give away. So that should fix the weirdness that's been happening with the printing press. So that was a brief overview on the changes that have been included in the past few versions of Super Factory Manager. Have a good one, and thank you to all the supporters. I really appreciate it. Peace.